This is the Mission Shaped Podcast. You're listening to the author's take.
Well, welcome. My name's Simon Goddard and I lead on resourcing within Fresh Expressions. And it's really good to be joining Chris and Karen, who are going to introduce themselves in a minute for today's author's take. You're more than welcome as you either watch this or listen to this as a recording for the Mission Shaped podcast. But if you are watching live or listening live, then please do engage and interact with us through the comments on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll seek to engage with you. So Chris and Karen, we're going to be talking about the third of the books that you've written together. But before we talk about that book, perhaps you could just introduce yourselves for those that are listening and perhaps haven't connected with you before or read either of the other two books. So Karen, you go first and then introduce yourself briefly, and then Chris, we'll hear from you.
Oh, thanks, Simon. So yeah, I'm Karen Openshaw, and my background is in all things well-being, really, particularly latterly. So I'm a trained counsellor, chaplain, mentor, and I run my own consultancy, and I have a real passion for the connection between the practice of mindfulness, which is considered to be a secular practice now, and the deep Christian tradition of contemplative practices. So yeah, that's my passion, and that's why we've written the books.
Yeah, and we first connected through Fresh Expressions because you were for a while a member of the FX board, weren't you? So that's where our paths crossed for the first time. Brilliant. So it's good to be working with you on this. Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself as well, because you've co-authored this book with Karen.
Thank you very much. Yes, and as with Karen, and before your time, Simon, I was also a member of the Fresh Expressions board a few years ago. So we've got lots of connections in that kind of way. So prior to my retirement, and this is how I met Karen originally, I was the Bishop of Bolton in the Diocese of Manchester. And over recent years, and this is, as I'm sure we'll come on to say more about, the third publication that we've worked on together. And so I've been very grateful, not least through knowing Karen and working with her, to learn some fresh insights into the practice of mindfulness, and also how that particularly connects as we think about Fresh Expressions, new ways of being church, how mindfulness connects with people who may well be searching spiritually, but for whatever reason haven't made the connection with Christian faith or church, or may have been maybe even hurt by church or something like that. So part of my passion as somebody very much committed to and involved in evangelism through my ministry is about making connections. And I think the practice of mindfulness not only connects us wonderfully with God, but also with other people.
That's great. Thank you, Chris. We're going to dive into the book in a moment, but I'm just going to talk about where people can get hold of not just this book, your most recent book, which is called Self-Loved, Mindful Journeys of Learning to Love God, Neighbor, and Self, but also your two previous books written together, Mindfulness as Mission Gift and Mindful Devotions, a 40-day journey through the Bible. And just for those who are watching or listening, you can get hold of those books. And at the moment, we've got a special offer on where you can buy all three books for £14.75. If you go to freshexpressions.org.uk/shop, you'll find those books there. That's a 20% discount off the price of all three books if you order them together. But we're here today to talk about this latest book, Self-Loved. And Karen, I understand, having read the book, that this has been around sort of brewing for a while, this idea for this book. So why don't you tell us a bit about the sort of the genesis for this new book?
I mean, I originally started writing this book way back in 2017, which is around about the time you and I met, Simon.
Right.
And at the time, I'd just been diagnosed with fibromyalgia and depression. and I really was very poorly. And despite the fact that I've spent most of my working life supporting others and encouraging others in their well-being, I actually didn't really practice very much self-care at all. I combine that with, you know, as a deeply committed Christian, I told people just how very, very much this amazing God that we love loves them. I didn't really own that for myself either, really.
Wow.
And a couple of things happened, which I talk about in the book, but meeting Martin Grindrod and doing the secular mindfulness-based stress reduction course kind of brought the two things together. And at that point, I realized that I really wanted to write something to help other people to understand how important it is to look after yourself and love yourself in a right kind of way. And also just how very, very much we are loved by God, because there's a real misconception and misunderstanding, I believe, in the Christian faith of what those first two commandments mean. And I believe that people work really hard to love their neighbour and, you know, sort of would profess to love God. But actually, if you are not practicing a right kind of love of self, you know, if you don't see yourself through the eyes that God sees you, then that Trinity is completely out of balance, because you can't love anybody out of an empty vessel.
Yeah. Thank you, Karen. And we're going to be sort of digging into the chapters as we go through our conversation today. And Chris, so I think so. There are 5 core chapters, and then there's a 6th chapter where you put some practices together. But we just take the first chapter at the moment, because that is about our love for God, and it'd be great to hear how, because you wrote that first chapter, Chris. It'd be good to hear that the sense of taking that great commandment to love God. What connection does it have with mindfulness? That particular call to love God with everything that we've got, our mind, soul, strength, etc.
Thank you. I think, just if I may pick up on what Karen was saying just now, in terms of the genesis of the book, I think what she would say, and what we both found, that although that was the start of things, this is now the right time for this book to have appeared, and the fact that it's all the richer through the different contributors, and it's an enormous privilege that I've had to be one of those in writing this particular chapter. I think that, you know, I've been a Christian for most of my life, and been in ministry for over 50 years. Can't quite believe that, but that is the case. So I've been familiar with these commandments, in a sense, all the way through my life journey and my Christian journey. And I've used these words in many services that I've led, reflected on them. But I think connecting them with mindfulness has had a number of aspects to it, really. One of the aspects of mindfulness that I think that has helped me is a fresh understanding of what it means to be attentive to God, attentive to ourselves, and of course attentive to other people. And when you read the words in Deuteronomy, from which then Jesus quotes in the New Testament about loving God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, the beginning of those words, often known as the Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one," and then goes to speak about loving God in all those different ways. It's a call to be attentive, to hear, and there's a very real connection between hearing and obedience, because you could ask the question, you know, can you actually command love? You know, the words command and love may not seem to naturally belong together, but when you think of the original setting of how these words were given, and then Jesus taking them up in the way that he does, the word obedience actually comes from 2 Latin words, ob and audire, and audire is obviously about audio, is about hearing. So for me, the connection, particularly through mindfulness, is a call to be truly attentive, to be present as we express our love for God. But we can only express that love of God when we know how much we are beloved by him and from him, and being in his presence and being present to him, to really understand that this isn't a command that is about demand so much as an invitation to be attentive and to live in the light of that call, which is actually going to be fulfilling.
Yeah. So you're saying that the call to love God is actually an invitation to listen, to hear God, and that's an act of love. I'm just trying to think of I think he's mentioned in the books the Brother Lawrence and his sort of desire to be attentive and practicing the presence of God. There's very much, isn't there, in mindfulness, the sort of the being aware of the presence, and but being, I guess, in that sense, it's about being aware of God in the present moment.
Absolutely, well. Yes, and I mean one of the most well-known definitions, and again it's quoted in the book from John Kabat-Zinn, is awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And I know, as somebody who, I'm an activist by nature, my senses can often be quite scattered, and I think to be consciously attentive and present doesn't come easily and naturally, but has become increasingly important for me in my understanding of my relationship with God and his love for me. I mean, it's a journey for all of us, and none of us have got there, as we know that, but it's just been an incredibly helpful dimension of my own personal journey in loving God and serving God over recent years.
That's great.
Yeah, and the phrase that I use is it's about being in the present moment, but as Christians, it's about being in the present moment, aware of being in the presence of God.
Yeah, that's great.
Can I
Karen,
go on. Yeah, go for it. To say one more thing.
Yeah, of course.
Just quickly to say, and this emerges in the book. I mean, although I've been speaking personally, and again, one of the strengths of the book is that each of us tells something of our own personal journey within each chapter. But one of the other aspects of this, of loving God, is not just the personal, but that I touch on the way in which churches can lose the heart of things, not intentionally, but it can easily happen. And I say that both as a Christian and somebody who's been in church leadership. And so, for example, when the Apostle John in Revelation 2 addresses the church in Ephesus, he speaks about losing your first love. And in the busyness and the activity and the activism sometimes of church communities, not intentionally, where is our motivation? Is it coming from that heart of love? And the Apostle John challenges that and says, come back to the heart of it all, which is about loving God in heart, mind, soul, and strength as a community, as well as individuals.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. I know Fresh Expressions serves a movement of pioneers, people who are starting new things, and often that new thing arises out of the call of God. And that's what we hope, that people are hearing the call of God to start a new thing. But it is so easy, as you say, to start the new thing and then get so busy that you become less attentive or even non-attentive to God and his call and his direction in that thing. And that it can become a burden rather than something that is an act of love and obedience. Karen, we've sort of hinted at this, but you're not the only two authors in the book. There are 5 of you that have written this. And it'd be good just, you mentioned Martin already, so it'd be good just for you, could you tell us a little bit? We will come to your chapter, don't worry. But
don't worry. No,
if you could just tell us about, tell us about the other authors. Important.
Yeah, so it's just, I mean, Chris mentioned, I was going to say at this point, this really is a Kairos moment. So it's been a beautiful watching the tapestry be woven around this, because as I say, I started this as a solo project back in 2017, but it wasn't God's timing. And I love the fact that it's taken till 2025. In fact, on my Facebook the other day, it came up that I'd been encouraging Sean Lambert, who's one of the other authors, asked me to read his manuscript, asked us both, in fact, and to do a review of it. And in one of our conversations, he encouraged me to pick this book back up again and get it finished. So way back in 2017, I met Mike Moynihan at Fresh Expressions conference. and told him a bit about my vision. And he said, I think first you need to write this book. And that's how Mindfulness as Mission Gift came about. And I was beginning to think this book that felt like a passion, felt like a vision, wasn't going to happen. But it's literally felt like God has put one person after another, after another, after another into the jigsaw puzzle in order for it to become a reality. So first of all, you know, I met you, I met Mike. Along the way,
Oh, Karen, I can't hear you. Oh, your sound has gone again, Karen. Why don't you? We'll carry on this in 2 minutes. Chris and Karen, if you want to log out and log back in again, that seems to work on these sorts of things. I'll talk while we try and get the sound back from Chris and Karen. And so Karen was just telling us about the other co-authors and how the book became a reality. Let me, while we're waiting for Chris and Karen to log off and log on again, I'm just going to remind you of the offer that we've got on the books. You can buy all 3 books: Mindfulness as Mission Gift, Mindful Devotions, and this new book, Self-Loved, from the Fresh Expressions shop, freshexpressions.org.uk/shop, and $14.75 for all 3 books, which is a discount of 20%. But if you just want to get Self-Loved, this new book, it's available from Fresh Expressions in our shop for $7.99. It's also available on Amazon. So do take a look at it there, and it's $7.99, and would commend it to you. Hopefully, Chris and Karen will be joining us again soon. So can we hear you again?
I hope
Yes,
so.
sorry about
We
that.
can. Wonderful. So
I don't know where you lost me.
So you were just telling us about the conversation with Mike and the way that he was encouraging you to write Mindfulness as Mission Gift first, and then you were talking about meeting all sorts of people that helped make this book a reality. So you're going to tell us about the 3 other authors alongside you, and go on. Oh no, I can't hear you now. Your sound has gone again. That's a real shame. So not quite sure what's happening there. So let me tell you while we're waiting about our resource Godsend, which as I'm involved in FX resourcing, it's our key resource. Godsend.cloud is a web-based version of this resource, and it's a guide to starting new Christian communities. And there's also a book available, Godsend, and you can find that on Amazon. I'm gonna hopefully.
Yeah.
There we go.
I don't know what happened, Simon. It seemed there's a blackness goes over your screen. It just does a little circle, and then we lose you again. So sorry.
Yeah, well, that's okay. So before anything else happens, tell us about these 3 other co-authors, please.
Will do. So way back in, you still there?
I'm still there, yeah.
Oh, that's a relief. Yeah. So Sean Lambert, who is Reverend Dr. Sean Lambert, who again is a foremost expert in this country on Christian mindfulness. So he very generously offered to support us in this. Lovely, lovely lady, Bev Walker, that I met through Mindful Church, who I met because she bought the original Mindfulness as Mission Gift. So again, another beautiful piece of tapestry. And Martin, who taught me mindfulness-based stress reduction back in 2017. and of course yourself, and then you started with the FX resourcing, and yeah, you've supported us, and the lovely Susie along the way. And Dr. Amy Oden, who's done our foreword, she's an amazing theologian from America. Really pleased that she said she would do the foreword. Heard her speak at a conference and sent the script through. So yeah,
it's been a real team effort, and I think anything to do with Fresh Expressions is always better when we do it as team. I think
definitely.
that's always good. And so if I just give an outline of the chapters, because so Chris, you wrote the first one about loving God, and then there's one that Bev wrote about discovering mindfulness throughout Christian history, and how you said right at the beginning that some people think this is a sort of a modern secular strand, but actually it's there present throughout Christian history as contemplation in other ways. And then we're going to come on to Sean's chapter about love of neighbour in a moment. Then there's this chapter from Martin, Understanding Secular Mindfulness. So he talks about the context of, as you say, where you first encountered mindfulness. And then you come on to love of self. And then the last chapter, you sort of all put together your practices, which a very practical way, as you read that, is really helpful, because, you know, what does mindfulness actually mean? What does it look like in the lives of these people that are writing about it? And that's really insightful and helpful. But Chris, tell us about Sean's chapter, because we had the sense of love of God from you, and then Sean writes about that in the context of community, which I think is a really interesting way of writing about neighbour. That because community is one of those steps in the Fresh Expressions journey. That so what does it mean to love our neighbour, Chris?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, a sort of commonality that Karen and I and Sean have is through our links with Scargill House. And for those who don't know Sean, for many years he's served as a Baptist minister in local church ministry, but then was invited to be a speaker at Scargill House, and he speaks in his chapter of having an epiphany moment, and people can obviously read the details of that, spoiler alert, but part of that epiphany moment at Scargill House was the recognition of being connected in there with an intentional community, and the way in which, as he discovered, as he and his wife Claire then for a period of time became members of that community. And I can speak from a similar experience from my involvement at Lee Abbey. When you're in that kind of a context, there's no sense in which you can choose your neighbour. Your neighbours are those who God has called together to share life. And he would speak very much of that experience of Scargill, both as a speaker and then for a period of time a member of the community. And he continues to have a regular link and connection there, as being something that really, yes, was an epiphany moment and opened his eyes to the contrast with what he calls quite a lot of unneighborliness in our world. And sadly, again, sometimes unneighborliness in the life of the church. Yeah. And the way in which, obviously, a neighbor is anybody who God puts, as it were, in front of us or around us or alongside us. And what it means to face up to the challenges of truly loving loving neighbor as we would love ourselves. And what does that actually mean? And how we treat people with respect as persons and seeing the whole person and all that means for them. I've often thought about a cartoon that I remember from my younger years. Some people may remember the Peanuts cartoons, and there's one particular cartoon with the balloon coming out of a character's mouth that says, "I love mankind, it's people I can't stand." And you know, the challenge to love neighbor, I mean, Karen rightly says that sometimes as Christians particularly, we do pour ourselves into loving others and caring for others at the expense of ourselves. But equally, we know that we are not always lovable ourselves. Yeah. And so there are also challenges. And of course, Jesus goes even further when he talks about loving enemies. So that takes us into another dimension as well. So really helpfully, Sean unpacks how there's much to be gained through the insights of a community like Scargill House, and how that can model something, albeit imperfectly, about how we relate to others who cross our paths in different ways. I quote Sean, "On community, we don't get to choose our neighbour. They are chosen for us."
Yeah, that's very powerful, and I think so often we can be with people, but not using the word mindful of who they are and their presence. I'm thinking, in the church community, and sometimes our desire to love others or to speak to others, there's some sort of other motivation that's different to love. But I think also as we go through our day, I know in one of the videos that we in the Godsend resource, we encourage people to think about the people they encounter during the day, because you can go to the shop and hand your money to a checkout assistant or ask someone in the aisle for directions and not even be mindful of them as a person. Almost just talking to them as in a way that just doesn't acknowledge their personhood. So I think it's really important for us to be mindful of those around us.
And I think it's just that attentive word again, as I used it in relation to God, but it's being truly attentive to others, and also in terms of the understanding of definitions of mindfulness. That Jesus said, "Do not judge, or you will be judged," and it's again the non-judgmental aspect that we aspire to. And again, it's a journey, very much a journey.
Yeah. And I've just noticed Bev Walker, one of the authors, is online watching today, so she sends her greetings to you both.
Thank
wonderful.
you. That's great.
Karen, we're coming to your chapter now, because love of self. So let's lean into this. This is where everything began in terms of this book 8 or so years ago. So tell us a bit about mindfulness and love of self. Because I asked a question, and whether this cues you up or distracts you, I'm sorry. But the sense of there will be some people who say loving ourselves is tantamount to selfishness, there's sort of self-centeredness. Is that really what love of self is, or is it something different to that?
And that sounds more like narcissism, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if it's not that, what is love of self then, in a healthy way?
I think you've hit the nail on the head with that word, really, Simon. It's a healthy way. It's about balance. It's about getting that right, and we so often get it wrong. And I was getting it completely wrong, because like Chris, I'm an activist by nature, and a bit million miles an hour, and never really slowing down enough. I was forever being given the scriptures, be still and know that I am God, and in quietness and in trust, and all of that. But, so busy. And much of that busyness, really good busy, really good, helpful, trying to make life better for people, projects I was working on and things like that, at the expense of my own health and well-being. Trying to be all things to all people, but not caring for myself properly. And that attentiveness Chris talks about, that slowing down, and mindfulness isn't I think people think of mindfulness as a bit, sort of get your yoga mat out and sit and chant Om for a few hours. And, mindfulness is about being able to just have that still, calm space wherever you are and whatever's happening within you and around you. It's about bringing yourself back time and time again, and it's self-care in that sense. I don't believe any kind of selfishness is not healthy, but as a therapist, the number of people who mistake selfishness with self-care is incredible, really. I have to say, no, that isn't selfish, that's self-care. That's important, because if we don't do that, then we can't care for others.
Yeah. It's something I've been reflecting on recently, in terms of it's difficult to offer ourselves in love to God or to others if we are not really in touch or connected with ourselves. It's difficult to be present if we're even not present to ourselves, if we're not aware who we are and how we're feeling and what we've got to offer. So for me, this sense of this is almost it's not the foundation, but there is a sense in which it's really difficult to love others in a healthy way and to really offer ourselves to God if we're not present to us to ourselves. I don't know what you think about that. Yeah.
I mean, that's why the and self is in capitals in the book, because it is that misunderstanding. I think you're right, it is foundational. I think that's why they are the first two great commandments, because it's about it's what Richard Rohr would call the divine dance, you know, of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit pouring into one another all the time in love, and out from the Father into the Son, out from the Son into the Spirit. The Spirit lives within us, you know, and actually, if we can't love ourselves properly, we can't love our neighbour, and we're not actually loving God in a right kind of way either.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Let's move into sort of a broader discussion. We've sort of gone through the book there to give people a sense of what they might find when they buy a copy of the book. But that last chapter you called A Trinity for Wholeness, Signposts for Loving God, Neighbour and Self. And it might be useful now, not as a spoiler, but almost as a taster, to offer people a sense of what mindfulness actually looks like in practice. And some of the you share your practices, all of the 5 authors share their practices in there. If there was one thing that people could put in place as sort of as they listen or watch this to begin their own mindfulness journey, what practice might you want to recommend to them, or what pathway might be helpful for them to go down as they think about mindfulness and exploring this further?
Can I couch that first?
Go for it, yeah.
You'll remember, Simon, we were going to have another chapter on Christian mindfulness. And for whatever reason, again, Kairos, God incidents, that wasn't happening. And so what we decided was to ask each of the authors to offer their own practices. And to me, it's the most rich resource of ways to practice mindfulness as a Christian, because they're all our different practices, and some of them are very similar, some of them are different. And I think the main thing to take here is that it's not one size fits all. Activists would not practice mindfulness as a Christian in the same way as somebody that's maybe a little bit more introspective, a little bit more reflective. So I think that's the beauty. All of us bring different experiences. I think the main thing is, for me as a Christian, hemming your day. So I start my day in prayer and reflection of some kind, whatever that looks like, and end it in prayer and reflection of some kind. And I think that's a commonality for all of us, that we do that. And then we do different things as we go along. What would you say was the most important?
I think before coming on to a particular practice, I think it's important that those 5 different examples of practice, as Karen has rightly said, reflect our different personalities, reflect what is helpful for each of us. But we put it in the context of being drawn into, and Karen's made reference a few minutes ago to the divine dance of the Trinity, about the fact that we are drawn into the life of God, and that's at the heart of whatever our particular practice, being drawn into the heart of the life of God, who invites us into his life. Jesus speaks of the Holy Spirit coming, and the Father and I will make our home in us, and it's from that sense of security that we then have different practices that are helpful for each of us. For me, just one of the things, and I would absolutely go on what Karen said about how one starts and ends the day, whatever the particular practice is. I've found over many years the importance of journaling, not only because it helps reflection, but for me personally, it helps the act of writing slows me down as I try and discern where has God been at work in this past day, what are some of the things to learn from that, and you can then go back and also pick up when look back into the past, as it were, and learn that something for the present. So I think for me, that's just a particular practice that for a number of years has helped me to become more mindful, to be more still, to be more aware, to be more attentive. But as Karen has rightly said, the richness of the chapter is people's different practices, and hopefully one or more might resonate with people who read the chapter.
That's great. We're soon coming to a close. I'm going to, those of you that are connecting with us live, there's still an opportunity for you to ask a question of Chris or Karen. So do be typing into the comments on Facebook or YouTube. And even if you're watching a recording of this, clearly we won't be able to answer your question, but do feel free to comment on these videos and subscribe to the YouTube channel or like the page on Facebook. So as we near a close, and just to wait for any comments or questions if they might come in, I'm just going to remind people of the 3 books. As you can see, this is actually, while I've got that book there, I'll list the 3 books again in a minute. But Karen, do you want to talk to us about the image on the front of Self-Love?
Yeah, on Mindful Devotions, a good friend of mine, Karen Markham, kindly allowed us to use the image that we'd used for a CD because we were in a choir together. So when we came to be writing this book, I asked her if she would do the image for this, and wanted something that again was a trinity. So the idea was it represented, self, God and neighbour, Father, Son and Spirit. And so that's the heart of the Father, the cross of our Saviour, and the golden light of the Holy Spirit. Yeah.
Brilliant. That's
Bound
great.
together.
Yeah. So Karen has done both of the last 2 books, the cover illustrations. And so, sorry if you're listening to this, you'll have to go to freshexpressions.org.uk/shop in order to see what we're talking about. On the Mindful Devotions, there's Hand in Hand, and on Self-Love, yeah, there's a lovely image of a heart and a cross and a golden ring and a golden glow that is blessing. Just to say, Susie, who has helped us in the production of this book, she's watching, and she's let me just there you go. Hi Karen and Chris, it's a great read, full of real honesty and vulnerability too. Thank you for all you and the other authors have given us in this.
Well, Susie, we definitely couldn't have done it without you.
Absolutely.
So that's a great commendation.
Well, it really is, because she's the only one who has really completely read it over and over again as our editor, hasn't she?
Indeed. And you mentioned already that Amy Oden wrote a foreword for the book as well. Let's draw our time to a close. I want to thank you both, Karen and Chris, for the ongoing way that you serve our Fresh Expressions movement through these books around mindfulness. It's so important that we have this sort of healthy balance. Those of us who are pioneers are often quite activist in our approach, and I think to balance that with an attentiveness, I love that word, Chris, that you used a few times, an attentiveness to God. We talk all the time about listening to the context where we're in, and so that attentiveness to the neighbours, the people around us, but also attentive to ourselves, how we're managing what God's saying to us, and where he's calling us into and where he's not calling us into. All of those things are really important, and these books are like toolkits for us to pioneer well. I mean, they're not just for pioneers. Mindfulness is I think important for all of us, but I think they serve our movement really well. So thank you again, Karen and Chris. Any closing words before we wrap up?
I'd not wanting to have the last word, but if you invite me for a closing word, these are actually words of Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
Well, will you save that 1 second?
I will.
we would like to thank you so much, because
Absolutely.
your belief in us, and you've enabled us to get these books over the line and to do this. So thank you, Simon.
No,
Over
you're
to
welcome.
you.
You're welcome. Chris, the final word to you, or to Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
This was actually quoted in a Richard Raw daily reflection some time ago, and it is in the book. But I think it sums up so much of what we hope and pray this book will be about. And this is what the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu had to say: "Before you can love your neighbour, brother or sister, as yourself, you must first love yourself. And to first love yourself, you must know God loves you now, loves you always." And I think there are a few better words that could sum up what we're hoping this book will all be about, and will impact and bless people, those already Christians, but not least those who may be seeking in some way, but just to discover that they too are beloved by God.
Amen.
Yeah. Wonderful words to be reminded of as we come to a close. And as you go into the rest of your day, may you know that you are loved by God. Do listen to other episodes of the Mission Shape podcast, and there'll be further authors' takes. So do look out for those. But yeah, may you know the love of God for you and for those around you for the rest of this day. Bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. God bless you.